Alert for you in what some are calling a victory for the president's administration. North Korea calling off plans to fire missiles into the waters near Guam, at least for now. Leader Kim Jong-un appearing to step back from potentially starting a war, but warning he could change his mind if provoked. This is Outnumbered, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, anchor of the Intelligence Report, Trish Regan, is here. Former national security staffer under President Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner. Co-host of After the Bell on Fox Business, Melissa Francis, is here. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, Melissa's work husband. Yes, her co-host of After the Bell and host of Forbes on Fox, David Asman.
Very happy to be here.
And you are one of our favorite ones.
Well, we have so many FBN representatives here.
We're very lucky.
Yeah.
We're work husbands.
I am very lucky. I always say I feel better. I'm happier on the set if he's there. It doesn't matter what show it is.
We can't get enough. We had dinner on Saturday night. If that's not enough.
That's a test.
With my husband's relationship. Yes.
All right.
Good. Every day, 4 p.m., Fox Business.
There you go.
All right. Well, a possible nuclear crisis averted for the time being. Kim Jong-un praising North Korea's military after looking at plans to launch missiles into the waters near Guam. But state media reports he decided to wait on the launch and watch, quote, the foolish and stupid conduct of the Yankees. This after a warning from Defense Secretary James Mattis.
If they fire at the United States, it could escalate into war very quickly. Yes, that's called war, if they shoot at it. If they do that, then it's game on.
Meantime, Trump supporters say this is a big win for the president. Former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski praising the way President Trump and his administration handled the situation.
What this president said was, you don't want to mess with me. He's a man of business. He and General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, were very clear. If North Korea launches a missile at us, General Mattis said it will be a declaration of war. And we are the world's greatest superpower. The President of the United States was very clear that if North Korea tries to do something against the United States, he will react swiftly, decisively, and it will be a complete annihilation. And I don't think they're ready for that.
Whoa. David Asman, you have been following this closely.
Yeah.
Is this, at least for now, a big win for the administration?
It's huge. It's a huge win, and it just shows that this administration has put together the strongest, most experienced, most realistic team in dealing with foreign affairs. I mean, you look at everybody that they have. Jillian, I think you'd agree. Tillerson is a terrific Secretary of State. You got Mattis as Defense Secretary. You have McMaster. You have Kelly. You have Nikki Haley at the UN. I mean, these people have balanced the good cop, bad cop, it seems, at least for the moment, just perfectly. It's interesting that Mattis' Tough Talk, the soundbite that you just played, contrasts with something that he wrote in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, in which he and Tillerson said, and I'm quoting here, the U.S. has no interest in regime change. Well, that kind of scared Ambassador Bolton and myself when we talked about it. But again, they're constantly playing this good cop, bad cop routine, and it seems to have had tremendous effect in dealing with North Korea.
It's really interesting. Jerry Seib wrote about just that in the Wall Street Journal this morning, but he went on to say there's a couple big problems with that. They might be together on this, and they might be engaged in constant conversation and constant strategy, but it went on to say President Trump isn't always on that same page, and sometimes there are mixed messages coming out of the White House. Anyway, Jillian, at least for now, they've stepped away from this, but at least from now is the point, right? Where does this go next?
I would describe this ratcheting down on the part of North Korea as it's absolutely a success, I think, for the president, but more importantly, it's a win for the American people, because this de-escalates the situation. It takes some tension out of what has been a very tense 2 weeks now. I think, though, it's important to point out, I see it as more of a tactical success rather than a big strategic victory. And this crisis is not necessarily averted.
No,
this
not at all.
crisis is certainly not averted for the medium to long term. It's a good step and a good direction, and it does indicate that the president and his team have had some successes in dealing with the North Koreans.
But can I just interject one thing? It's
Sure.
the first step that we have taken as a country in the past 4 presidencies, I would say, against sort of the acceptance of North Korea belligerence as something that you just have to deal with, live with. This has been a pushback by a presidential administration on North Korea that I don't think we've had in at least the past 3 administrations, if not the past 4. I'm sorry to interject.
But it's relevant to mention that, number one, it's not over. I mean, that's the point that you were making, is that this is just one tiny victory. We turn turn down the heat for a moment. I mean, they still are building, obtaining, amassing whatever weapons that they want over there. And it's also, I think, relevant at this point that we have somebody at the helm who the rest of the world believes is willing to pull the trigger. And that's different, like you said, from what we've had in the recent past. But as much as there was talk about, you have two madmen, I mean, there was that comparison between our president and Kim Jong-un, which was ridiculous. What is accurate is that we do have somebody who's willing to follow through on whatever red line they lay down.
So it means we have to take this to the next step. And, I agree with you. It's not over. And we need to be putting a ton of pressure on China to make sure that they are on board with us. And I think that's partly what you saw just yesterday with the president saying, okay, we're not going to stand for this. Exactly. They're stealing $600 million worth of intellectual property from American companies. Enough. And so that threat for China that we're willing to go after them in terms of trade, in terms of intellectual property theft, in terms of counterfeiting, that exists now as a threat. And I think that North Korea knows that they got someone new now. It's a new administration. It's a new universe that we're living in, and they're not gonna test us because they know that we mean business.
Can I just say one thing that was overlooked yesterday that happened that is in reflection now seems very significant. North Korea recalled ambassadors from 3 places this was yesterday, from the United Nations, from China, and from Russia. The same day, as you mentioned, Trish, that we came out with our new sanctions against China. It was supposed to be focused on intellectual property, and that is a concern, but clearly, as this was a message about North Korea as well, and it really had an effect. For them to pull back their ambassadors, which means that they're constructing or trying to construct North Korea a brand new approach to the world, one that probably will be less belligerent than it has been. It's very significant.
So when Kim Jong-un warns that he could change his mind if provoked, you're left wondering, Jillian, what that catalyst could be.
Well, they're completely unpredictable in that sense. I would also just hedge a little bit against what you guys were laying out, which is a new vision for the North Korea-U.S. relationship. I don't believe that the Trump administration they may be planning that, they may be thinking about it and strategizing it, but they have not brought that to the table. If you look back over the last 3 administrations, David, you mentioned, that's President Bush 43, President Obama,
I would say
and now
Clinton,
President Trump.
Bush, and Obama.
Strategic deterrence remains the official policy. It remains the policy, at the United Nations. It remains the policy on the ground inside
patience.
North Korea.
That's what they focused on in that op-ed yesterday.
That was something. That's more of a talking point. That's a coined phrase used to describe something that's actually happening on the ground. But there's no more American troops in South Korea today than there were 6 months ago at the start of President Trump's administration. My point here is that I think what President Trump is doing is bringing a different stylistic approach and putting a fine point on the rhetoric.
Okay, so based on what has just happened, is that approach winning?
Well, that's what I was trying to say earlier. I think that so far that seems to be tactically proving successful for the president. If we're completely in 6 months from now, if we're in a position where this has completely been ratcheted down and we're no longer at a crisis point, then I'll be happy to say this has been a tremendous strategic victory for the Trump
Can I push back, though, Jillian, because there have been very substantive changes. The biggest one being a buildup of our military, like we haven't had for at least the previous administration. The second one, as you just mentioned, Trish, is the economic sanctions against China. We're getting serious against China. China is seeing that we are going to turn the screws on them. So we have seen specific. And I just want to say one other thing. Not only should American people breathe a sigh of relief because of what has happened, but let's not forget the South Koreans, particularly the people in Seoul, where millions of people were literally in the crosshairs of those crazy people. They already have the guns pointed at those people. We have a producer at FBN who's from South Korea, and she just returned from South Korea. She said, they've got a pretty thick skin. They've been through war. They've seen a lot, but they were getting extraordinarily nervous, and finally they can breathe a little sigh of relief over there.
I think Jillian's point, though, is that they haven't laid out an official strategy. While the movements have changed and they seem to indicate a different position from us for sure, you're looking for an official, whatever their doctrine is going to be going forward in the area and laying it out, writing it. I don't know if this administration is ever going to do that.
But the people who are saying this is an entirely new approach, I think those folks are reading too much into the tea leaves. I think if we look at sanctions, it's new rhetoric and it's a new stylistic approach to the problem.
But it's
underlying that, the policy is not so different.
That also carries some risk and potentially some reward. In that the risk is he gets ticked off enough, his ego is bruised enough, he does something really disastrous. The reward being, of course, that he hears this message loud and clear in a way that he simply hasn't before. So the rhetoric in and of itself, while you may say it's just language, I think that language, especially on the international diplomacy stage, really does matter.
And he wouldn't have turned around if the Chinese hadn't forced his hand. And they forced his hand because they were feeling the pain.
I'll bring this full circle back to that piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning, which ended saying the situation remains tense and dangerous, and there are more moving parts than apparent. To track them, keep a close eye on the Tillerson Mattis show. Going back to your original point. All right, President Trump calling racism evil and denouncing white supremacist groups by name yesterday following the Charlottesville violence. But the mainstream media slamming his latest response. Is their criticism unfair? We debate. Plus, new emails reportedly showing the Trump campaign rejecting multiple requests by an aide to set up meetings with Russian leaders. Will it help put to rest the questions about Russian collusion? And after the show, you can join our live chat by clicking the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered or go to facebook.com/outnumberedfnc. And of course, you can tweet us, join the conversation. We'll see you there.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
Strong words from President Trump yesterday condemning hate groups by name following the deadly violence at a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville on Saturday. But the mainstream media renewing its attacks on the president, slamming the time it took for his second statement and his delivery. Just a couple examples.
Why did it take so long? Why, for the president, does it seem easier to suggest U.S. intelligence operatives are behaving like Nazis than to call these actual Nazis Nazis?
What a difference a teleprompter makes, you know? It's like, it's night and day. He sounds like a kid whose parents made him apologize for egging their neighbor's house. It's unbelievable. If there's any silver lining to this, and there isn't, by the way, it's that whatever vacation he was hoping to have is now ruined. It has been a terrible vacation.
President Trump taking to Twitter to respond, writing, quote, made additional remarks on Charlottesville and realized once again that the fake news media will never be satisfied. Truly bad people. Some Democrats also joining in on the attacks. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying this. From the beginning, President Trump has sheltered and encouraged the forces of bigotry and discrimination. It shouldn't take the President of the United States 2 days to summon the basic decency to condemn murder and violence by Nazis and white supremacists. All right, so they laid it on thick, and even though he came back out and made that second statement, David, they were relentless.
You know, when I was watching this whole thing unfold on Saturday morning, I just knew they were going to find some way to blame President Trump for it. Didn't you realize that the media somehow was going to fit him into the mix? Read the note of the mother of the woman who was killed on Saturday. She came out with a note to the president after his second note about what happened on Saturday, after his second speech about it. She said, "Thank you, President Trump, for those words of comfort and for denouncing those who promote violence and hatred." I think it's very callous not to respect the words of the mother of the woman who was killed. She thanked the president unequivocally. She thanked the president, said he said what needed to be said about what happened in Charlottesville. That's enough for me.
But, you know, I mean, you're hearing this not just from the left, a criticism of his response, Jillian. Ari Fleischer was on Fox News just a little while ago, worked in the Bush administration, and he said he can't defend the president's initial response to this. It was too late.
I think there's a lot of emotion infused into this situation right now. Understandably, race relations is like, you know, the most pressing hot button issue probably of the century so far in the United States. What I would say from a policy perspective, the way I look at it is fair to criticize the president's initial response and the fact that his good response came 2 days after the fact, but I don't think it's fair to extrapolate from that somehow the president is racist or that the president is unsympathetic to the victims here. I think that is a bridge too far. That brings emotion and judgment into a situation that we really need to more responsibly, as public voices, talk about as a policy matter. I think he was probably not well served by whatever staff members told him to wait a beat before he spoke out on this issue.
But then some in the mainstream media took this a little far with their criticism. I think you'll agree with this one when you see this. The New York Times saying that Rubio and Cruz only denounced the violence because of their 2020 ambitions. This New York Times reporter, Eric Lipton, tweeting this. Sorry to be cynical, but most of all, Rubio and Ted Cruz, to me, seem mostly to be doing a tremendous job of posturing for 2020. Senator Ted Cruz responded to that saying, gosh, you're right, because Nazis and the Klan have such love for Cuban Americans. If only we worked for a paper that shilled for Stalin.
At least he's got a sense of humor about it, right? But, you know, part of what this is getting at, unfortunately, is identity politics. And identity politics has become increasingly sort of the norm in this environment. I think President Obama very much played to identity politics. And those that are on the left criticizing President Trump are criticizing him for some part of identity politics. But let's not forget where this playbook came from. I think, yes, there's more perhaps he could have done or should have said. He thought that he had enough ground covered. It wasn't enough because of the rawness of the situation. And frankly, because he's been put in this box by many members of the left that want to accuse him of having this kind of really horrendous support from a horrendous part of society that doesn't represent who we are as Americans. So because of that, he would have been better served to have doubled down and come out very strong against it initially. He eventually did that. Okay, fine. You know it's never going to be enough with this media, though.
But none of that solves the problem. I mean, if you don't take the time to understand the other side, you're never going to solve the problem. And I see so many people out there who are either intentionally misunderstanding the other side, not making any effort to hear what the other side is actually saying. I mean, even when you look at so many of these protests, you know, it's about violence. It's not about trying to get out there and actually solve the problem. And maybe I'm the cynical one, but I feel like you hear so little of people who actually want to solve the problem. And the first step towards that is trying to understand what's really going on as opposed to intentionally misinterpreting what's out there and casting blame.
I know I'm getting a rap, but I just have to say, I think one thing that's overlooked is that the country in many ways personally has so gone beyond the rhetoric, the political rhetoric on this issue. Everybody from us pundits to the politicians like to make political hay out of it. But so many families in the United States have mixed race relationships within their family. We all, like me, like many people. I mean, you got African Americans, you got Asians, you got Latins within your family, and that's changed America much more than the people who have a stake in this politically are willing to acknowledge.
All right, we'll leave it there. New emails obtained by the Washington Post showed the Trump campaign rejecting several requests to set up meetings with Russian officials. Whether this could help put accusations of collusion to rest. Plus, a new report that the Obama administration was warned as far back as 2014 that Russia was planning to disrupt the U.S. political system, but that Mr. Obama's team did very little about it. Should Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team be looking into this?
The Washington Post obtaining details from emails showing the reluctance among Trump campaign members to set up meetings with Russian leaders. The campaign refusing at least a half a dozen requests sent through a young campaign aide. The exchanges are part of more than 20,000 pages of documents the Trump campaign turned over to congressional committees this month. The emails reportedly show advisors were concerned that such meetings could violate sanctions, among other issues, and former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort was among those who rejected at least one of the meeting requests. A spokesman for Manafort issuing a statement reading in part, "This is concrete evidence the Russia collusion narrative is fake news." Experts tell the Post these emails show the Russians were trying to penetrate the Trump team, and we do know several campaign members did meet with Russian officials at various points. David, what do you think? You're smiling and listening.
The point is that the Russians were trying to penetrate every maybe not Bernie Sanders,
Absolutely.
but at least Trump and Hillary.
Who
I'm sure they were.
You know, the perfect example is this, and I can't remember her name, but this Russian woman who set up the meeting with Manafort and Donald Trump Jr., the lawyer, she was also working with Fusion GPS, which was churning out this anti-Trump stuff, including the famous dossier, half of which was apparently untrue. So she was working both sides. Their purpose, as it always has been, even when they were the Soviet Union, was to sow doubt in the American public about the security of their system. They want Americans to think that their system sucks, and they're putting out all this information to try to prove that point. On any side, there was no collusion. There's just an attempt to undermine the U.S.
Natalia Veselnitskaya.
God bless her.
Very good job. Good job. Jillian, what do you think?
Fact checker.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we have to take care, whenever we talk about Russia and this administration, to point out there's two issues at stake, two separate investigations. One is the collusion narrative. One is Russian interference by its own means, apolitical, just interference in U.S. general election. This story about George Papadopoulos, who, as far as I can tell, was a very minor player, sort of as low on the totem pole in a campaign as you can be, being a volunteer. This is exactly the kind of person that provides a potential weak link for an outside adversary to exploit. So I think what we need to look at here is not necessarily, as you said, this may very well undercut the collusion narrative, but we really need to look at the very important national security issue, which is their attempted interference in the American election, because as a lot of former Obama intelligence officials have told us, they saw an uptick in these attempts, and they saw an uptick in Russian capabilities during 2014 through 2016. To me, this is the more important national security issue.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's what's relevant and pops out to me in this particular story, if it's proven true, if all of this stuff is as it's being reported.
Trish, I mean, it just shows they're casting a very wide net. I mean, they were trying to see, who is out there that we could possibly influence and try and get inside one of these campaigns, don't you think?
And I think that this is what they do. It doesn't make it right, but we should anticipate and expect that this is what they do. And they do it on both sides. I mean, they do want to delegitimize our system in some way. And I think that Donald Trump would be well served to come out really hard against the Russians here on this one. It doesn't delegitimize him in any way. And I think that maybe perhaps underneath it, he has some concerns about that. But let's remember, the Russians did not hack the election, i.e. they did not hack into debolt voting machines and somehow twist things around. They may have influenced things on the margin, but I think they were doing that on both sides, and I think this is just what they do. I mean, that said, I think...
But it requires, as you said at the beginning, a robust response from the United States.
Well, we're starting to see that. I mean, President Trump tweeting out just today, in fact, about a stunning new Politico piece saying, and I quote, according to a report just out, President Obama knew about Russian interference 3 years ago, but he didn't want to anger Russia. Politico reports that the Obama administration got multiple warnings as far back as 2014 of Russia's intention to disrupt the U.S. political system, and that Russia's networks reached far and they reached wide into U.S. and European governments, militaries, political parties, and, get this, even the media. One current official who served under Obama saying, and I quote here, "We started getting stuff in April, May of 2014 that was extraordinary about the extent of the threat and the capacities the Russians were building. We were worried Putin would try to test us, yet the administration still was reluctant to engage in more forceful counterintelligence strategies against the Kremlin." But former National Security Council spokesman Ned Price disagrees, saying the administration, in fact, did take some steps to counter Moscow's bad actions. But isn't this exactly what he needs to be doing right now, David, to go after the Russians themselves for what they did and frankly say, look, why didn't President Obama do anything?
You say Trump should, but what about Mueller? What are the chances that Mueller and his team will actually go back and look at the Obama administration?
I think zero. I think Mueller is on a crusade to find something against Trump. But I think I want to stand up for, in a rare instance, for the Obama administration, because I do think it's something that Russia has been doing for decades. It's not unusual, and I'm sure when a lot of people, in fact, Jillian, you probably know better than anybody what happened in the Obama administration, but I'm sure when they saw these examples of Russian interference, a lot of people said, yeah, so what else is new? I mean, they've been doing this for years. Let's investigate it. Let's keep our eye on it. But it's nothing new. Daniel Hoffman is his name, the former CIA bureau chief in Moscow, was talking about it. He's the one who said there's no collusion between Trump or for Hillary and the Russians. It's just something that is ongoing. And so they looked at it and probably said, you know, we've seen it before. We'll try to guard against it, but it's not going to affect our election.
It's unnecessary and it's a mistake to conflate the idea of Russians trying to interfere with delegitimizing the Trump presidency. And I think he makes that mistake when he says, you know, this is not real. They're just trying to, you know, make up for a bad loss. You don't connect them because it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be like that. And you also sound a little bit foolish because they so clearly are trying to influence it. But I think on every side, just to disrupt it, just to see who they can get their hooks into. It's not rooting for a specific candidate so much as it is trying to get your hooks in everywhere.
From a national security standpoint, then, would it make sense for him to say, okay, enough, we know the Russians did this, we're going to go after them, we're going to go after them hard, and also from a political standpoint, because as Melissa says, you don't want to be seen as linking those two. He won fair and square, nobody broke into the Diebold voting machines, but he needs to be going after these guys.
And decoupling those two issues is helpful from a national security perspective, but it's also helpful politically to the president and his administration. And this is, it baffles me that they have not been making a greater effort to do this. Think how great it would be if tomorrow President Trump made remarks in the briefing room and said, you know what, exactly what Trish just said. This attempt was amped up. It was a bigger attempt. It was more well coordinated than we've ever seen before. It was thwarted, thankfully. But here's the Russians tried to do A, B, and C. It was thwarted. We're gearing up so that the next time there's a general election, there is no question about their capabilities actually infiltrating the American voter infrastructure system.
Let's face it.
This would help combat the collusion.
So do you look back at Obama and his administration and say they should have done more, knowing what they did?
You can always do more. I think,
well, they didn't do much, knowing what going back to 2014.
Well, but I don't know that that's true, Sandra. That's anecdotally what is being reported in this piece, but I don't know that that's true. If you're a an Obama administration intelligence official dating back to 2014 and you see signals, chatter that this is something that is being looked at by the Russians, what are your options?
Also,
doing nothing is not the same as not, like launching a military invasion or announcing something publicly. Those were not options on the table. So actions that were taken were probably covert in nature. There was probably a lot of cyber war stuff going on. I don't know that it's fair to say the Obama administration did nothing. Also, keep in mind, they're trying to deal with Russia's illegal invasion and occupation of Crimea around the same time.
And you got to also keep in mind that everybody was caught off guard by the sophistication of cyber terrorism, whether it was in the public sector or in the private sector. Think of all the companies in Hollywood that were hacked into. Think of all of the attacks from other governments like North Korea. I mean, over the past 2 or 3 years, we've seen a sophistication in the form of these attacks that has exceeded the understanding of a lot of people in government. So it's not just this particular incident. By the way, can I bring up a show that you and I love? The Americans. The Americans is a show that, Melissa, it's our guilty pleasure. We love watching the Americans. But it is actually very real in what it portrays, which is a group of Russian spies back in the 1980s who are doing exactly the same thing that Russians are doing now, trying to undermine Americans' confidence in our political system.
Well, and I see reports like this, and it mirrors the president that is levied against President Obama reminds me of the criticism that was levied against President Bush in the aftermath of 9/11. You had intelligence telling you that something was going on. How could you have let this happen? Well, it's not always that simple. You can't, when you don't have a specific threat with a specific target, it's not always easy to prevent something catastrophic from happening. Things like that will happen. Is it fair to talk about what culpability the president has? Absolutely. Is it fair to point to the president of the United States and say, this is on you?
Well,
I don't know.
In this case, Russia was very much trying to use our biggest strength, which is our democracy, our freedom, our openness as society, against us. And we have to indeed guard against that in the future. And President Trump would be well served to make sure he comes out hard on this one. Anyway, a special election primary underway today in Alabama, where President Trump's been ramping up public support for GOP candidate Luther Strange. How much does the president's endorsement matter? And what today's vote could tell us about the 2018 midterms. We're back after this.
Fox News alert voters heading to the polls today in the first step towards deciding Alabama's next U.S. Senator. Top GOP candidates include current interim Senator Luther Strange, Congressman Mo Brooks, and former Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice Roy Moore. Strange has been temporarily filling the seat since Jeff Sessions was confirmed as Attorney General in February. All have embraced President Trump during their campaigns in an effort to compete for his supporters. But the president decided to officially endorse Luther Strange earlier this month. Since then, he's taken to Twitter multiple times to showcase his support and recorded this just yesterday.
Hi, this is President Donald Trump, and I love the people of Alabama, and I hope you go out and vote for Luther Strange for Senate. We are doing things that a lot of people said were impossible, but I need Luther to help us out. Go to those polls and vote for Luther Strange.
And here's what Strange said on Fox and Friends this morning.
Why do you think the president picked you?
Well, I think it's based on a couple of factors. One, we've developed a personal friendship. We like each other, and we have the same goals, to make America great again, to implement his agenda. That's what the people of my state want, and that's what I've been doing from day one in the Senate since I took Jeff Sessions' place in February.
Obviously going to be interesting to see how this plays out, David, and what influence President Trump has in this election.
Well, the interesting thing about this is that this is the one thing that President Trump and Mitch McConnell agree on. They both like Luther Strange. It's kind of odd because Mo Brooks and the other guy, the judge, Roy Moore, both have talked about how wonderful Donald Trump is, but they both attacked Mitch McConnell in the Senate as being the one. So it's interesting to see that the president, even though he and Mitch McConnell have been kind of sniping at each other. He is helping McConnell in this sense. McConnell has told the president he needs Strange because Strange understands what McConnell's trying to do with the Senate, and the president is going along and helping McConnell on this. So this is a rare instance where McConnell and Trump are working together.
Roy Moore, you've been watching this election. What do you think is going to come of all of this? I mean, right now, Roy Moore could be the dark horse. He's polling pretty well.
Yeah, and I think in most of the polls, Strange is coming in second right now. So, but the point being, I was watching the interview this morning, and Steve said to him, why you? Why did the president choose you? And I wanted to say, like, I know the answer. And the answer is because he's on board with the president's vision and Mitch McConnell's vision for tax reform. And that's, I think, one of the most important assets that he's got right now. He is lockstep in sync with that, and he's ready to get on board and help drive it in whatever way he can. I think that's the priority for the rest of the administration.
Frothing at the bit on this one. I mean, we are pounding the hammer every day. If there's one thing that we can get behind, it's this idea that we need tax reform in order to unleash the economy, create more jobs. I think a lot of the problems that we had would be a lot smaller if we had an economy that was growing more robustly. I hope that's why the president is focused on this election in particular. I hope he's looking ahead to tax reform and he's making the kind of pitch. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and when you talk to folks from Treasury, they're always saying we need the president to get out there and really sell tax reform in order to get it done. And I mean, we watch the market every single day. I think it's already priced in, and if they don't get everything together to get that done in this calendar year, I don't know what's going to happen with the market.
People are really anticipating it, expecting it. The market's pricing it in. I agree with that. The selling part's going to be hard, and the reason is because the left is going to paint this as, oh, you just want tax cuts for the wealthy, you just want tax cuts for corporations, and what the left always misses on this, and it's Econ 101, is that those tax cuts for corporations will help to employ all of those people in America that need jobs. They forget that it is businesses that actually employ, and the people that are actually paying the taxes are the ones that need the tax cut. You can't cut taxes anymore, certainly federal taxes, for nearly half of the country. So this is going to need a hard sales pitch. It's going to be a pitch that needs to be dressed up, I think, with a little bit of a bow, David, because it's a little bit complicated, and I think people immediately recoil and think, oh, well, it's just going to the corporations.
It's going to take a PR move by Donald Trump. He's got to use all his salesmanship like he didn't with the health care issue. He's going to have to do it double time.
Or send Mulvaney out. He's fantastic at it. I mean, he really hits a home run when he talks about it.
All right, everybody's watching this one. Meanwhile, progressive hero Elizabeth Warren taking some shots at the Clintons and proclaiming that liberals have taken over the Democratic Party. Is she right? And is this a winning direction for Democrats?
We are not a wing of today's Democratic Party. We are the heart and soul of the Democratic.
More Outnumbered in just a moment, but first let's get to John Scott with what's coming up in the second hour of Happening Now. Hey, John.
Hey, Sandra. In our next hour, new polling from Gallup and Monmouth on the president's approval ratings as the Charlottesville violence continues to inflame emotions. The president's trying to turn toward infrastructure today. We'll have that for you. Also next hour, California sues over its sanctuary cities and the Trump administration's offensive against them. That and much more ahead. Happening Now.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren slamming Clinton-era policies and proclaiming that liberals have taken control of the Democratic Party following Hillary Clinton's failed presidential campaign. Warren spoke at an annual gathering of thousands of progressive activists over the past weekend. Take a look.
We are not the gate crashers of today's Democratic Party. We are not a wing of today's Democratic Party. We are the heart and soul of the Democratic Party.
Throughout her speech, Warren didn't shy away from the prospect of a 2020 presidential run. And in fact, she took the opportunity to outline her vision for the party and the party's future.
We're going to be the people who lead the Democratic Party back from the wilderness and lead our country out of this dark time. Then we can't waste energy arguing about whose issue matters more and who in our alliance should be voted off the island.
You know, part of the reason we're seeing this, I think, tell me what you guys think as well, is there is, in the wake of President Obama wrapping up his second term, Hillary Clinton's failed run, a bit of a power vacuum in the Democratic Party. And so we're going to see a lot of kind of positioning and jostling to take the reins over the next couple of years until the party puts forward the next generation of leadership and tells the party who to coalesce around. I think that's what we saw this
That's always the case, I think, after these big losses. You see it on both sides. Right. You say, do we go more extreme? Do we go more to one side, or we go closer to the center? I would say that it's really about who has the fire. I don't think it's about being left or center or right or whatever when the power vacuum comes around. I think that's what we learned from this last election, and it's something we've learned even in cable and news, that being broad in any capacity doesn't work anymore. That broad is the same as watered down. That people have too many options, whether it's television or it's politics. You don't get enough support. That what you have to do is stake out a territory and really get people excited in that group. I think both sides have a chance. And the Democrats, it could be someone fiery towards the middle who ignites a lot of support, or someone to the left. President Trump, you never would have predicted. I mean, after the last election, for the Republicans, they said, we've got to not have a white man.
And actually, President Trump serves as a perfect example, because he's neither centrist nor more to the right nor left. He's got his own package.
But can I just, a rare occurrence where I'm going to disagree with my I think that the Republicans should be very happy with what Liz Warren said, because it is a recipe for failure. It has been proven itself. Look at the Democratic seats lost in Congress in the Obama administration are enormous. 63 in the House, 11 in the Senate, and the state legislatures, it's even worse. 960 state legislature seats were lost. 12 governorships. We now have more than twice the number of Republican governors and Democrat, 34 versus 15. And that's because of the Obama progressive/socialist policies.
I totally disagree with you. I think you're proving my point, because with him it was about the person and how you felt about President Obama and the passion that people had for him.
Okay,
that's
people were passionate towards him, but it didn't work because the policies didn't work, and that's what Liz Warren is for. She's for policies that don't work, and the people vote against it.
So maybe it's a little bit of a combination of both. In other words, you're talking about something, and I think you get the nail hit right on the head there, and that's star power. Donald Trump had star power. People were excited by him. That's why 10,000 people would show up at some of these rallies. Hillary Clinton never had that. John Kerry never had
Liz
that.
Warren?
Dukakis never had that.
So what are you saying about Warren?
Elizabeth Warren, I actually don't think has that star power. I think Bernie Sanders has. It's likability. It's not just, there's like, the charisma does this person understand what I'm going through? Do they have any empathy for the economic challenge?
She's fighting for women and she's saying we're going to fight to put more women in positions of power, from committee rooms to boardrooms to really nice oval-shaped room at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But she says it with almost anger in her voice.
Yeah.
And
She does.
I don't
She's
know
not
that
like,
that sells that message.
Even Bernie, who is a likable guy personally, but he's gone a step too far. He's going to come out in September for full-blown socialized medicine, and it'd be interesting to see how Liz Warren responds to that, because policy does make a difference beyond personality, and if she goes with Bernie for full-blown socialism, I think she goes
But his
down.
policies are proven to not work, and he's still got a zillion people out
Not
for
a
him.
zillion, not a zillion, less than a zillion.
I mean, they had to really kill themselves to not give him the nomination. I mean, he came out of nowhere. We were laughing the first day that he came out that they found a socialist so that she could for sure have the nomination, and then in the end, he gave her a run for her money.
The genuine quality that Bernie Sanders has, because he does believe, I think it's a crazy economic policy, but Liz Warren doesn't have it.
All right, we've got to
All
leave
right.
it there. More Outnumbered in just a moment.